In this video, I am going to discuss the poem A Tiger in the Zoo by Leslie Norris. But before we begin with the discussion, let us watch a video clipping. The message conveyed in the clipping is loud and clear. Man is not the only animal that seeks freedom. Every animal deserves and desires this basic right for a fulfilling and worthy life. I'm sure you will be able to appreciate the poem better if you agree with the same. Let us now discuss the learning outcomes. So, after the completion of the poem, you will be able to compare the behavior of the tiger in the zoo and in the wild, appraise the significance of the title, identify and name the literary devices, interpret the implied meaning of a word or phrase in context to the poem. Write the theme revolving around the unfair and cruel act of entrapping and confining a wild animal in a cage, thus depriving it of the freedom to live in its natural habitat. Let us first discuss the theme. The poem revolves around the plight of animals who are put in cages and deprived of a life of freedom. The poem brings forth the idea that it is unfair and cruel to imprison animals. The captivity in cramped spaces deprives the animals of their natural habitats and suppresses their natural behavior. The tiger in the poem presents a pathetic sight as he moves about in the limited space in the cage in quiet anger, instead of roaming freely in the forest and looking for its prey. The poet presents the agony and helplessness of a caged tiger that lives in a zoo and explains what his life could have been if he had been a free animal. You all will be able to grasp the central idea of the poem in a better way after going through the poem. So I am going to begin a detailed discussion. These are the opening lines of the poem. He stalks in his vivid stripes the few steps of his cage, on pads of velvet quiet, in his quiet rage. So here the poet says that the tiger, which has a striped body, is confined in the zoo. Its movement is restricted because of the cramped space in the cage. It can take only a few steps because the cage is small and it is not easy to move in it. Here the word stalks means walks. One cannot hear his footsteps because he has very soft feet like velvet, because of which there is no sound of the tiger's footsteps. Pads of velvet here refer to the tiger's soft feet. The tiger remains quiet Although it is filled with rage or anger, it suppresses his basic emotions and temperament as it is completely helpless being confined in a cage. He should be lurking in shadow, sliding through long grass, near the water hole where plump deer pass. Looking at the imprisoned tiger, the poet is filled with pity and contrasts his life in the zoo to what it would have been in the forest. He says that the poor tiger should have been in his natural habitat. If this tiger was free, he would have hid himself behind the long grass near the water bodies so that he could easily catch a plump deer in order to have it as its food. So here plump means fat. So basically the poet wants to say that the actual life of a tiger is to live in its natural habitat where he could catch his prey, where he could lurk in the shadows. Lurking here means moving in a secretive manner. He should be snarling around houses at the jungle's edge, baring his white fangs, his claws, terrorizing the village. The poet says that if the tiger was free, he would have snarled around the houses located at the outskirts of the forest. He would terrorize people by showing his sharp teeth and claws. So here fangs means the sharp teeth of the tiger. This would create fear among the people living in the villages. And snarling also means the sound of the tiger. But he is locked in a concrete cell, his strength behind bars, stalking the length of his cage, ignoring visitors. In this stanza, the poet comes back to the real situation of the tiger who is locked inside the cage. He says that the tiger is confined in a strong concrete cell. He further says that as the tiger is behind bars, so his strength is also behind the bars. In other words, it is suppressed. The tiger cannot display his ferociousness. He never tries to terrorize the visitors because his power is restricted by the cage. Therefore, he ignores the visitors as he is helpless and cannot attack them or behave as he would have done in the wild. He hears the last voice at night, the patrolling cars, and stares with his brilliant eyes at the brilliant stars. So this also presents a pathetic picture of the tiger. The poet says that in the night the tiger hears the sounds of the patrolling cars used by the zoo authorities to guard the zoo at night. The noise of these patrolling cars represents the noise of the civilized world, which stands in contrast to the sounds emanating in the natural surroundings. The tiger then stares at the shining stars with his shining eyes. The poet wants to say that the tiger is sad, and as he is confined in the cage, he cannot do anything. Therefore, he just stares at the stars in the night, which for him represent the free world of nature, and he yearns for this world of freedom. So let us discuss the message of the poem. The poet Leslie Norris wishes to raise his voice against cruelty to animals. He wants to convey the message that it is ethically wrong to put animals in small cages and snatch their freedom. They must be allowed the freedom to live in their natural habitat. When an animal is locked in a zoo, its natural instincts and behavior get suppressed and it just becomes an object of entertainment for the visitors. Animals can lead a quality life only in the forest and not in the cramped spaces in the zoo. So man must respect the freedom of animals as it is their basic right. So students, you can deal with the value-based questions if you know the theme and message thoroughly. Let us now see whether the title is relevant or not. The poem deals with the physical and mental state of the tiger who is forced to live in the cramped spaces of the cage in a zoo. It also presents an absolutely contrasting life of a tiger in his natural habitat. The poet wants to portray the helplessness and mental agony, the mental state of the tiger in a zoo, in contrast to his free and dominating existence in the forest. The title helps to emphasize that the tiger is in a zoo, but it is not its true home, and thus the poem highlights the cruelty of human beings who take the tiger away from its natural habitat. Thus the title A Tiger in the Zoo is appropriate. Let us now discuss the literary devices as is one of our learning outcomes. So you should be able to identify the literary devices and also point out the examples. So first is alliteration. You all must be familiar with it. It is the repetition of a consonant sound at the beginning or middle of closely placed words. So let us take up the first example. Stalks in his vivid stripes. So stalks and stripes, they begin with the same consonant sound. Locked in a concrete cell. So here, as you will note, that the C in the word cell has not been underlined because the sound here does not match with the sound of C given in locked and concrete. The third example, his strength behind bars. So the words behind and bars, they begin with the same consonant sound. Next, let us discuss metaphor. So there is one metaphor in the poem, on pads of velvet quiet. The poet compares the pads or the bottom of the tiger's feet with velvet, since both are soft. Because of the soft pads, the tiger moves without making any sound. Transferred epithet. It is a figure of speech in which an adjective qualifies or is placed with a noun other than the noun it actually describes. The adjective is used not with the noun which it normally qualifies, but with some other noun. So the example in the poem is quiet rage. It is not the rage that is quiet, but the tiger is quiet. So the word quiet describes the tiger and not rage. Although the two words quiet and rage have been placed together, but quiet does not describe rage, it describes the tiger. The tiger feels anger but remains quiet as it is in captivity and cannot do anything. It suppresses its basic emotions and temperament as it is helpless. Oxymoron. It is a figure of speech in which two contradictory words or ideas are put together. It is used to draw attention to a contradiction. So the example of oxymoron in the poem is quiet rage, because the words quiet and rage are contradictory to each other, as one is loud and violent when in rage and not quiet. The tiger feels anger but remains quiet as it is in captivity and cannot do anything. Let us now discuss the imagery. So imagery refers to the use of language in such a way as to create vivid pictures or images in the reader's mind through words. The poem is rich in imagery as the readers can visualize a tiger with a striped body walking quietly in his cage in the zoo. As discussed earlier, there is also the imagery of the forest showing a tiger gliding through tall, thick vegetation or threatening people with his terrifying teeth and sharp claws, and of a plump deer near a water body. We are also able to visualize a star-studded sky that the tiger looks at during the night. Next, we come to the literary device repetition. First example, on pads of velvet quiet, in his quiet rage. So the word quiet has been repeated to stress on the silence in the zoo against the sounds in the forest. The tiger is helpless and moves quietly on his padded feet despite the anger which it cannot express. The second example of repetition is and stares with his brilliant eyes at the brilliant stars. The word brilliant has been repeated. There is the brilliance of the stars at night, and the tiger has his eyes shining in the darkness of the night, expressing his longing for the freedom represented by the stars. So we come to the end of the poem, but I hope you will remember the message of the poem that each animal deserves to be free. So let us all join hands to stop this cruelty by not visiting a zoo or a circus, and also by creating awareness regarding the issue. Thank you so much.